I'm David. 7 years ago, I finished my studies at Stanford University, California. I'm stressed thinking about what job I will do and which city to choose to live in. My parents are elderly. They live on pensions in their hometown of Montana. In a few days, I will move out of the school dormitory. I constantly searched for information about cheap apartments on student groups and found a place about 8 kilometers from my dormitory. It is a fairly small 2-story house, including 2 bedrooms on the second floor, living room, and kitchen on the first floor. This house is being rented by Kevin, 25 years old. He wants to find a roommate and reduce costs because Kevin has a fairly low income as a cashier at a convenience store. When I moved in, I was very surprised with the space and interior of the house. Everything is complete and comfortable. Really great compared to the amount of money we rented. When I asked about the landlord, Kevin said he would come check the house quarterly. The rental contract Kevin had already prepared and just needed to sign it. Kevin is a quiet but kind person. Kevin helped me arrange things in the room and told me to let him know if I needed anything. The next days I sent my resumes everywhere looking for a job. One evening, I stayed up late to talk to my friends about work and upcoming plans. When I accidentally turned around, I was startled and almost dropped the phone when I saw Kevin standing at the door, looking at me with wide eyes. "I've been looking for my phone all night," Kevin answered me in an emotionless whisper. Looking down, I told Kevin in surprise that the phone was in his hand. Kevin slowly looked down at the phone in his hand. Then, without saying anything more, left for his room. He must be sleepwalking, I think. Another night I was half awake and half dreaming, feeling that the bed was more uneven today. When I moved, I felt like someone was lying next to me. I woke up and saw Kevin lying next to me, in a neat position, his hands on his stomach, his eyes staring blankly at the ceiling. I jumped up and screamed loudly. I got angry and asked Kevin why he was here. He maintained his lying position, slowly turning his head to look at me. "I'm so scared. It keeps clinging on to me. It wants to eat me." I sighed at the thought of Kevin sleepwalking again and pulled him back to his room and quickly went back to sleep because I had an interview tomorrow. The next morning I returned home at 11 a.m. after the interview. Hearing a shaky mumbly coming from upstairs, I ran up and saw Kevin sitting huddled in front of the door. Now that I look closely, Kevin is much thinner. His face is haggard and his eyes blackened. Kevin kept muttering incomprehensible things about death. I asked worriedly, but he didn't seem to hear anything. His mouth mumbled faster, his face showing fear and panic. I went to help Kevin up, but he reacted very strongly and pushed my hand away. He said he was out of breath and thirsty. I quickly ran to pour water, but when I returned, Kevin was gone. Pushing open Kevin's room door, I saw him lying on the bed, covered with a blanket. I put the glass of water on the bedside table and went out. Did he go through something terrible? A week later, I was accepted and had a job that matched my qualifications. One late afternoon after coming home from work, I was startled to see a strange man about 60 years old in the house. He was tall and thin, with many strange tattoos on his arms. I was quite impressed with his beard and long hair tied back. It turned out he was the owner of this house. He said he came to inspect the house and end the lease with Kevin. I was very surprised, so Kevin left without saying anything to me. The landlord told me to find more roommates to reduce costs because maybe in the next few months he will increase the rent a bit. The homeowner moved away and I was still thinking about Kevin. He left without taking anything with him, which was strange. About a week later, I was busy with a new job. The post looking for a roommate also received a lot of attention, but I haven't been able to reply to all of them. One night I came home early after 3 consecutive days of overtime. Lying in bed answering messages from a few people interested in the house, I fell asleep without realizing it. I met Kevin, still with the same haggard face, eyes wide open in panic. whispering voice echoing hauntingly. "I'm cold. There's a rope around my neck. There are too many people here. They all look at me with scary eyes." Suddenly, Kevin let out a loud, shrill, and a painful scream. I jumped up, looked around the room in fear, then quickly reached out and turned on the light. Looking at the clock, it was just after 9 p.m. I calmed down and went down to the kitchen to pour myself a drink. I can't get out of my head thinking about Kevin. I searched every corner of the house with the thinking that this house must have some secret. I don't understand why I did that at that time. As if someone had instructed me, I suddenly remembered Kevin's bedroom. Unexpectedly, my guess was correct. Behind Kevin's bed, there was a door leading down to a place like the basement. I don't know if Kevin had discovered it yet. 40% of me right now is fear. The remaining 60% is curiosity. Holding the baseball bat from Kevin's room, I slowly walked down. I saw the dim light, reached the end of the stairs, and the scene around the basement made me dumbfounded. Many human skeletons and bodies that had not yet fully decomposed were tied tightly to the four walls. In the middle of the room was Kevin's body, tied to a wooden post, his face filled with pain and panic. Kevin's neck was tied tightly with a blank stone string, and a talisman was pinned straight to his chest. On the wall behind me were photos of many people. They were all young men. I saw Kevin's photo on it, and in the last photo, pasted in the red circle, is me. I'm Jacob. I live in Baldwin Park, California. That night, I and my two friends Roy and Ethan went to the KFC store in the city to have dinner. At the end of the meal, we didn't want to leave yet, so I invited two of my friends to play Truth or Dare. Ethan and I spun to Truth and told the secret about the girl we were paying attention to. When it was Roy's turn, he turned to Dare. I excitedly stood up and challenged Roy to go out of the store and perform a spell to call out to the devil. Roy is very superstitious of the supernatural beings, so he immediately refused. But Ethan and I were determined not to let Roy go. I tried to force Roy, and in the end he had no other choice but to comply. It was nearly 12 o'clock at night, and there were only us and 3 employees left in the restaurant. Looking through the window, his frightened and trembling appearance made Ethan and I burst out laughing. Ethan and I told each other that this would be an experience for Roy to become braver. But when we looked back through the window, we couldn't see Roy anymore. I told Ethan, "In a few seconds, he will scream loudly and rush in here." But 5 minutes later, Roy still hasn't appeared. Ethan said that Roy was probably trying to lure me and Ethan out there and scare us to startle us. Ethan and I happily held back our laughter and went out. We decided to ruin Roy's joke. But walking around the store, still couldn't find Roy. I looked for him in the parking lot, and Ethan ran into the store's restroom to search, but Roy was still nowhere to be found. I called Roy's phone. The other end picked up, but there was a very long silence. I turned off the phone, feeling annoyed with Roy's prank. I pulled Ethan home, ignoring Roy. At that time, I selfishly only thought about my own feelings without thinking about Roy's fear of being forced to do something he was so afraid of. I got home at 2 a.m. and went to sleep. The next morning, Ethan and I went to Roy's house. His sister opened the door and said that Roy didn't come home last night. She called many times, but Roy's phone said he couldn't be reached. Ethan and I looked at each other in surprise. I immediately took the phone and called Roy, and the other end picked up. We happily stared at our phones. I quickly asked where Roy was. He didn't answer. I called Roy many times, but the response was still silence. Feeling that this was serious, my sister Roy and I decided to report it to the police. Police reviewed security cameras at the KFC Baldwin Park store. The image on the camera recorded after performing the demon summoning spell, Roy headed towards the store's parking lot. But when taking image data from the parking lot camera, Roy was nowhere to be seen. Only saw a red shadow passing by while Roy was wearing blue clothes. Continue investigating Roy's disappearance. The police said I should call him so they can trace his location via the phone signal. Once again, this option failed when the police signal tracking system failed to pinpoint his exact position. Where did he end up? That's the question that's always on my mind. It's been a week since Roy went missing, and all police search efforts have come to a dead end. I'm really confused and regretful. I wish I hadn't thought of that stupid game. One evening, I was having a meal in the kitchen when I accidentally looked out the window and suddenly saw Roy. Roy smiled when he knew I saw him. I stood up and called out happily. Roy smiled devilishly, 2 sharp fangs and bloodshot eyes. I was stunned for a few seconds. Looking closely again, Roy returned to his normal state. Rushed out, but Roy had disappeared. Maybe I was wrong. I've been thinking too much about Roy these past few days. It was around 12 o'clock that night that I went to bed. When I was about to lie down, I saw Roy again outside the window with a devilish smile. I was so scared. How could he be there? My room was on the 3rd floor. Getting out of bed, walking towards the window, I slowly put my hand on the handle and opened the window. But there was no one there, just the dark and quiet space of the night. Suddenly, a loud, terrifying laugh rang out, and I turned around in surprise. Immediately, Roy, with wide eyes, wide mouth, bearing 2 sharp fangs, rushed to push me down. I lay in a pool of my own blood, looked up and saw Roy's face gradually turning into Satan's. Roy looked at me and laughed loudly. I screamed loudly and jumped up. The terrible dream I had just made my head hurt. My heart beat so hard it was hard to breathe. Quickly looked towards the window. It had been open for some time. I quickly rushed to close the window and close the curtains. The next morning, my body felt like it was drained of all its strength. Lying in bed, I called Ethan. I wanted to tell him about last night's dream. Ethan's mother answered the phone. She was sobbing, her voice distorted. Ethan crashed through the window from the 13th floor of his apartment last night. He was lying in a pool of blood with his body in pieces. I was dumbfounded by what I just heard. I turned around to look at the window. The curtains had been pulled open. On the glass window was printed the left hand with the index finger and little finger pointing up, while the remaining fingers were bent down. I'm Jim. I was 14 years old at the time. My family lives in Utah in a large house. I have an older brother named Julian, 19 years old. We are not close. Julian is very cold and even sometimes grumpy. I tried to break the ice for many times, but he ignored me. My childhood did not include Julian's companionship, but I'm used to it anyway. My room and Julian's are on the 2nd floor, separated by the stairs leading down to the living room. Julian is a Casanova. I can't remember how old he was when he brought home his first girlfriend. And I can't remember exactly how many girlfriends he had. My parents also talked to Julian many times that they did not want so many strangers coming in and out of the house. But he chose to ignore it and even got angry with his parents. Gradually, his parents didn't care much about Julian anymore. He was free to do what he wanted. For quite a long time, Julian loved a girl named Ella. She was very beautiful, with long brown hair, blue eyes, and a soft voice. Ella was also brought home by Julian like previous girlfriends. Unlike them, my parents really liked Ella. She gradually became close and participated in every event of my family. At that time, Ella almost lived at my house. Suddenly, one day, my family didn't see Ella anymore. When his parents asked, Julian replied that he broke up with her, but he didn't say why. Although my parents and I were not happy with that, we couldn't change Julian's decision. After that, he didn't bring any girlfriends home anymore. He constantly locked himself in his room. On a Saturday night, my friends went to a friend's birthday party. Julian went camping overnight with his college friends, and I stayed home alone. I locked the door carefully and checked all the windows. After making sure I was safe, I went up to the room to play games and eat snacks. After a while, my game console had problems. I remember Julian had a very modern game console. I tried to borrow it many times, but he definitely refused. This was my chance to experience it. I immediately ran to Julian's room. Great when he forgot to lock the door. I looked for the game console. But I started to feel uneasy. There was a very unpleasant smell in Julian's room. I couldn't describe it, but it definitely wasn't the smell of garbage or food. Ignoring it, I continued looking for the game console because my friend was waiting. I looked on Julian's bookshelf, and suddenly the door slammed shut, startling me. There was no wind outside. I had closed all the windows. At this point, I started to get scared, but I tried to calm myself. Finding a game console on a bookshelf makes me excited and relieves my fear. I quickly walked towards the door. Suddenly, there was a sound of gurgling water in the bathroom. I don't understand why my heart was beating so fast at that time. Julian probably didn't turn off the faucet carefully. I tried to calm down with that thought. This time the stench was stronger and more terrible, making me stop and feel nauseous. I walked towards the bathroom, slowly looked inside. The hand-washing faucet was not locked tightly. I breathed a sigh of relief and went to turn on the faucet. The stench filled the small space of the bathroom, forced me to hold my breath. Julian's bathroom floor is quite rickety, the tiles rattling against each other. Why didn't he tell his parents to fix it? I muttered. Just as I turned around to leave, I stepped on a brick, broke it, and sank deep beneath to cover my feet. I felt something liquidy and mushy under my feet. About 1 meter from where I stood, a tile on the floor bounced up. From below, a head of a person with a rotten and decomposed face appeared, long hair hanging around the face. I can't describe my feelings at that time. I was scared, panicked. My body was stiff, but when I moved, it was limp. I screamed with all my strength, ran a few steps and then fell down, trying to crawl back to my room. The distance between the two rooms is about 5 meters, but I feel it is very long. I called my parents in a muffled voice that was light in my throat, then called the police.
911.
I stood in front of the house and waited until the police and my parents returned. The first thing my parents did was call Julian, asking him to come home immediately. That whole night, my parents and I stayed up waiting for Julian to come home. The next morning, he returned and confessed everything. The body on the floor is Ella. Julian discovered Ella was meeting with another guy. Unable to control his anger, Julian strangled Ella to death and hid her body under the bathroom floor. Julian was sentenced to life in prison. My mother was hospitalized for 4 months because of that shock. My parents converted Julian's room into a storage room and paid more attention to me. I'm Ryan, 17 years old, living with my parents in Arizona. I have a passion for the gym. My father is my inspiration. My dad designed a fairly large room full of exercise equipment at home. Dad has an admirably toned body at the age of 58. My mother is quite young, 13 years younger than my father. Mom doesn't like to exercise but prefers skin caring and follows a strict diet. I'm very proud to have parents with outstanding and youthful appearances, but I have nothing in common with them, except for my mother's blue eyes. I don't care too much about this. After all, I'm quite handsome according to everyone's compliments. In my father's practice room, there's a wooden shelf containing many medals of large and small awards from gymmers. The top position in the middle of the wooden shelf is a picture of my mother when she was young. But in that photo, my mother has brown eyes. In my mother's room, there's also a very strange picture of a woman. I have never met her before. She's very beautiful, short brown hair and blue eyes like me and my mother. I witnessed several times my mother clutching that photo and crying, looking at her in so much pain and torment. I asked my mother about the photo of that woman. She just smiled at me and did not answer. After many times like that, I didn't ask about that woman anymore. My parents rarely show affection to each other. They respect each other's private space. They have a lot of love for me, but in two completely different ways. Outside of studying, I enjoy playing music and exercising in the gym. Everything was very normal until the last month. Every time I step into the gym, it feels cold and gloomy, a feeling I've never had before. At first I didn't pay too much attention to it, nor did I tell my dad about it. Until recently, a series of scary events that happened caused me unable to ignore it anymore. The first time was when I practiced at 9 p.m. I went into the room and turned on the lights and warmed up thoroughly. I started the workout by jogging, but as soon as I stepped on the treadmill, the light in the room suddenly turned off. Power blackouts in the area where I live are quite rare. Looking into the next room, the electricity was still on. I thought the light bulb was broken. But when I got close to the switch, it was in the off state. I turned my hand on the switch and the light came back on. At that time, I did not have any doubts or feelings of fear. I continued the training session and finished at 11 a.m. The second time was also when I was alone in the gym. It was around 10 p.m. I'm doing shoulder raises using resistance bands. Suddenly, the song I was playing turned off, and a few seconds later, a child's giggling voice froze the blood in my veins. The laughter was so loud and haunting, I shivered and got goosebumps. About 5 seconds later, the laughter disappeared. My music continued playing. I stopped the exercise, went to drink water, wiped my sweat to calm down, wondering whatever just happened was real or I was hallucinating. That day I finished my homework early. I didn't tell my parents about those two strange encounters because they would be so unbelievable. The third time it was not at night, but around 4 p.m. It was the weekend, so I spent time practicing earlier than usual. I improved my exercises with barbells. Lying down to lift weights, I feel like it's much heavier, even though my weight remains the same. After lifting it about 4 times, my mind started to feel dizzy and ringing in my ears. I closed my eyes lightly and then opened them to regain consciousness. When I opened my eyes, I brought the weight down at the same time. From the horizontal bar of the dumbbell, a woman hung, her long hair hanging down, her big eyes wide open, her mouth wide open, filled with blood. In her arms she held a crying newborn baby. The woman pressed her terrifying face close to mine. Her loud scream and the child's cry hurt my ears. I was startled and screamed loudly, unable to control the strength in my arms. The dumbbell pressed hard on my chest, making it difficult to breathe. At that moment, the woman also disappeared. I braced myself, used all my remaining strength to place the dumbbell on the support bar and sat up, clutching my chest and panting. It took a few minutes to calm down. I was about to get up and go to my room. Accidentally, I looked at my mother's photo on the wooden shelf. Mom looked at me, her unfamiliar brown eyes filled with anger and resentment. I was startled to remember the woman's face just now. She looks a lot like my mother, but it's the mother in the picture. I went into the bathroom and poured cold water down really hard to really wake up. Running to my parents' room, I wanted to tell them about the horrors I had experienced, but just as I approached the door, I heard 2 people arguing. "You are the one who killed my wife and son! You even destroyed your own face just to be here!" I was so shocked. I rooted to the spot, listening to every bitter word my parents said. It turned out that the woman with blue eyes in the picture in my mother's room was my mother's real face. So what about me? What is my true identity?
I'm Betty, 32 years old, living in Memphis, Tennessee. I'm an extrovert who likes to party. Every weekend, I will go to a bar to relieve stress after a week of work. Gradually, I cannot do without cocktails, music, lights, and dances. They make me feel extremely relaxed. And every day I came home later and later. There were times when I didn't leave the bar until dawn. But I just went there to have fun, absolutely nothing else. I live alone in an apartment in the Edge in downtown area. I am free to do what I want and I have no intention of getting married. Everything went normal until one day. That was Saturday. I arrived to my apartment lobby around 12 o'clock. My hair was messy. I held high heels in one hand and a handbag in the other, walking unsteadily. I stepped into the elevator and pressed the button to the 15th floor. I could feel the strong smell of my alcohol throughout the elevator. Just as the elevator door was about to close, a hand came to stop it. Entering was a tall man, dressed in black and wearing a full face mask. I was half sober, half drunk, so I didn't pay too much attention to him. He reached across my face and pressed the button for floor number 14. The smell of perfume on him was quite impressive. Silence reigned for a few seconds. The elevator displayed floor number 14. The man stepped out. He turned around and looked straight at me, and at the same time took out a small knife. He spoke in a very low voice. "See you on the 15th floor, sister." Then, a terrifying laugh echoed. It took me a few seconds to realize I was in danger. I quickly dialed the elevator's floor number. I want to call the police, but I can't remember the phone number. Without any preparations, the elevator reached the 15th floor and opened the door. My body stiffened. I knew I was about to encounter something terrible, but I couldn't resist anymore. A few seconds later, everything went quiet. I slowly walked out of the elevator, looked around and saw no one. I quickly ran back to my apartment and locked my door. If it were anyone else, I think they would call the police or building security, but I don't. Part of me is controlled by alcohol. I threw my things onto the floor and ran into the bedroom. I slept and forgot about the danger that was still lurking. The next morning, I woke up and looked at the clock. It was already past 10 a.m. My head hurts, my whole body aches, and the memory of last night is like a broken tape. When I sat up, trying to regain consciousness, I was startled to see a sharp knife placed on the pillow next to me. Holding up the knife for inspection, my heart felt like it was tightening as I read the name engraved onto the blade. Frank. Running out of the bedroom, before my eyes was the chaotic scene of the living room. Underwear was scattered all over the floor, but it was all torn. Returning to the bedroom, I now noticed that the wardrobe had been ransacked and my underwear was gone. Neatly placed inside is a set of red underwear and a piece of paper. "You will look great wearing it." I panicked, crumpled the piece of paper and took the clothes straight to the trash can in the kitchen and threw it in. I tied the trash bag tightly. In the cutlery drawer, a string appeared. I grabbed it and pulled hard. The drawer slowly opened, revealing an old, worn-out doll wearing a white dress, her body tied tightly with a rope. The doll has a pretty smile, but has 2 black tear lines drawn on its face. Trembling, I picked up the doll and saw its dress was stained red in a sensitive position. I was extremely panicked. I took scissors and cut the doll to pieces, trying to put it in a trash bag with the underwear. But its eyes were staring at me. His eyes were innocent but filled with pain and resentment. I quickly ran towards the door. I didn't want these disgusting things to exist in the house. Running to the door, my heart was once again squeezed. The picture I took with my best friend was posted on the door. We hugged each other tightly, cheek to cheek. But my friend's face was pasted over with another man's smile. A person I hate and loathe. Frank. I fell to the floor. My head hurt. I hugged my chest and sobbed. More than 20 years ago, my mother remarried a man named Roger. My stepfather is very kind and warm, but his stepson ruined my childhood. He is Frank, a cruel pervert hiding under the appearance of a handsome and kind man. He bullied me when I was young, leaving me with long scars. When I was a high school student, he began to pay attention and confessed his love to me many times. I tried every way to avoid him and denounce him to my mother, but Frank always has the perfect excuse to cover things up. One time, when my mother and stepfather were away, he lured me into the warehouse, tied me up with a rope, and gagged me. He deserves to be damned for what he did to me. That disgusting pervert was sentenced to 15 years in prison. For the past 15 years, I have had a new peaceful life. I seem to have forgotten that haunting face and smile. He's back again. Why did he find my place? Is he planning on ruining my life again? The deep voice, accompanied by a chilling laughter, echoed right next to my ear, pushing me into the depths of utter terror. Nice to see you again, dear sister. I have smelled this perfume somewhere.